Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. Let's take a look at a video. They still only exercise sovereignty within the nation of Israel.
I have a question about this. How does the development of the God of the Tetragrammaton fit in with the Exodus narrative?
Hey, thank you for a wonderful question. There are absolutely portions of the Exodus tradition and the book of Deuteronomy that predate the exile, and portions of the Exodus tradition probably go back to the 8th century BCE in the northern hill country, and some of the poetic fragments may go back even further than that. We see a reflection in the Exodus tradition of this idea that Adonai belongs in Israel, or at least belongs no further away from Israel than Mount Sinai, which is presented in some traditions as kind of Adonai's fortress of solitude. So you have Adonai coming up from Seir or from Sinai, mentioned in a handful of poetic texts, which suggests that that is home base, or at least that's the extent of their territory. And so Moses runs into Adonai on Sinai, and in Exodus 3, Adonai tells Moses, I have come down to deliver my people out of Egypt and bring them up to this land that I'm going to give them. And the Hebrews, as they're referred to, who are in Egypt, must take a 3 days journey into the wilderness in order to worship their God. They're not worshiping Adonai while they're in Egypt, which reflects this idea that worship can only be offered in the deity's own territory. Now, the notion that a deity has sovereignty only in their own land does not mean that they are precluded from traveling outside that land, or that they have absolutely no power. It just means they're not the one in charge. And in 2 Kings 3, we see an example of a military incursion into another deity's territory that ends in failure, because the king of Moab offers his heir to the throne as a sacrifice on the city wall, which catalyzes great fury, which scholars agree is most likely a reference to the intervention of the Moabite patron deity Chemosh, which drives off the coalition, and they are unsuccessful. Adonai does not deliver Moab into their hands. So that would be an example of an unsuccessful incursion into another nation, whereas the tradition of the Exodus tells a story of a successful incursion into another land. And we see in Exodus 12:12 where God says, I will exercise judgment against the gods of Egypt. So Adonai is leaving their territory to come get their people, and is then going to exercise judgment on the gods that are sovereign in that region. And because this story is coming down from hoary antiquity, because the elements of the narrative are already in place and we're just accreting more details to it, you can have Adonai be successful outside of their territory. The story in 2 Kings 3 is probably a little more immediate to the people telling the story. And everybody knows things didn't go so well when Moab threw off vassalage and we invaded to try to restore that vassalage or to try to destroy them. And so the memories of that event are too fresh for them to have God win, and so they have God having to pull back ultimately. So I would suggest that the story of the Exodus in its pre-exilic iterations still reflects this idea that Adonai belongs in the land of Israel, can only be worshipped in that land, and is not sovereign when leaving that land, but is still represented in the Exodus tradition as having had victory over the gods that were sovereign in that land.